All right. We are back for another episode of TPS, the Productivity Show, the number one podcast on iTunes when it comes to productivity and time management and efficiency. My name is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined by my co host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm excellent. I'm glad I ate before recording this. Otherwise, I think this episode is going to make me hungry. So I was smart and planned ahead.
Yeah, that's a smart move to do. It's kind of like the same thing when before you go to a grocery store, it's always a good idea to eat first because if you're hungry and go to a grocery store, you end up buying way more things than you ever need. At least that's been my experience about 50 times.
Can confirm.
So we're going to start talking about meal planning today. But before we start diving into today's content, one of the things we always like to do is share some of our favorite productivity resources as of lately. And today we have three of them here related to today's topic as well. So the first one is a app called Paprika or Paprika, depending how you pronounce it. And it's a popular recipe and meal planning app both on Mac, Windows, Android, and iOS. So it's available on all platforms. And we'll have links to it in the show notes as well. So don't worry if you missed out on that. The next thing is a meal kits delivery service called HelloFresh. Now, they were a former sponsor of the Productivity Show. They're not sponsoring this episode, but we have used this service before and we can highly recommend it and endorse it as well. So even if they're not sponsoring us, we're still recommending this service because we both enjoyed using it. And the third one is called Chef, but it's spelled as SHEF, so Chef. And this website and service is kind of like home cooked meals mixed with Uber Eats, where you can have like home cooked meals delivered to you. So instead of ordering from a restaurant, you would basically order from someone who would personally cook at their own kitchen at home and then have that food delivered to you. So it's kind of a new service and I've tried it and I actually really enjoyed it. So if you liked the idea of just home cooked meals delivered to you, check out Chef, again, spelled SHEF. And again, we'll have links to all of that in the show notes. So you can always go to theproductivityshow.com/372 and find out all the stuff that we just talked about and all the other things we're going to be mentioning here today as well. So Brooks, we're going to be talking about meal planning here. Who is this episode for?
Yeah, this is an episode we've been talking about doing forever. So I'm glad we finally managed to work it in the schedule. So if you're listening to this and you maybe find it hard to find the time to figure out how to eat healthy or to, eat in a way that meets your goals, this episode is going to give you tips for that. Maybe, and I know a lot of us can definitely relate to this, maybe your energy is just too drained at the end of the day. So you just can't think. It just like forget about cooking, forget about prepping, like even the planning and figuring out what to eat. You're just too tired for that. So end up just maybe getting takeout or something like that will help you be proactive when it comes to planning your meals. And maybe you already plan out your meals, but you want some tips to try something new, shake things up, and maybe save even more time. This episode is for you. We always like to give a little preview for what's coming next. So next week's episode, we're going to be going in a completely different direction, and we are going to revisit an episode we've done a number of times, which is our favorite productivity apps. So the latest update of our favorite productivity apps, we're going to be sharing that next week in the productivityshow.com 373. So we're going to get into our tips for how to do meal planning and stuff like that. But before we do that, we should probably talk about what we mean when we say meal planning. And meal planning is one of those things where eating doesn't necessarily take that much time unless you're out for a big dinner or something like that. But everything around it can take up a surprising amount of time. It can be easy to spend 3 to 4 hours on prepping, cooking, cleaning up. You might be, like we said, really busy and then end up eating junk food. And then what happens is you might have low energy, your health might deteriorate, could lead to weight gain or different types of issues. So meal planning is an opportunity to save time, eat healthier, and potentially even save 10 hours a week, let alone the energy and attention benefits that come from it. So what we mean when we talk about meal planning is figuring out, at least at a high level, what you're going to eat for the upcoming time period. So we're going to talk about it in the context of planning meals for a week, but it could be whatever time period, a month or whatever, or 3 days or whatever time period works for you. You can apply it to that, figuring out what you're going to make and make it easy, or eat, I shouldn't say make, figuring out what you're going to eat, and then do it in a way that works for you. And it's very important that I said the word, it doesn't necessarily have to be make, because a lot of people might hate cooking or don't have the time for it. We really want to emphasize that meal planning does not mean cooking.
What do you mean it doesn't involve cooking? I mean, isn't that the whole thing though?
No, meal planning could be other options. It could be stuff like delivery that we're going to get into. It could be other meal planning options that help you save time, energy, but also be healthy. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you have to be the one that's doing the cooking. So we're going to get into all that as we get into our tips for planning the meals for the week.
Okay. Now you're speaking my language, because I have cooked once in the last 7 years, and the one time I cooked was for Valentine's Day. And it was pretty good, but I wasn't, very, very good at it, or particularly enjoyed it for that particular reason. But just to kind of put some context in place, we're about to share with you 3 ways to plan your meals for the week. And again, if you're looking for ways to save more time, eat healthier, be more consistent with your eating, and reaching your health goals that way, I think the next 3 tips are going to be really helpful for you. So the first tip is to figure out your schedule and goals. So in my experience, and I'm sure in your experience as well, meal planning works best if you make it a routine. So you want to make sure that you pick out a realistic time to do it and try to make it a habit, right? So for example, when I did this a few years ago, I said, okay, every Sunday is when I'm going to spend like an hour or two kind of planning out what I'm going to be eating for the upcoming week. And also, when I was really into fitness, I knew exactly like how much I wanted to eat, like calories and stuff like that. But we're not even talking to that like level of detail yet. We're just trying to figure out, okay, when can I actually plan for this? When can I set aside to know what I'm going to be doing for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 days when it comes to your eating schedule and routine? So it might take a little bit of practice to kind of figure out what your best day is or time period to kind of make this a routine for you. For me personally, Sunday has always been the day for me to kind of like plan the whole week. That's when I do my weekly review. That's when I have like the most control of the day as well, in terms of like what I can do and how I schedule my time. And so it all kind of like fits together in that sense, where I do my weekly review, I kind of plan my meals and stuff like that. I make my schedule for the upcoming week, so I kind of know what to expect. Is this something you do as well, Brooks?
Yeah, we also do it Sunday, way back in TPS235. So you can go to theproductivityshow.com/235. I talked about our routine in my family for having a family calendar. And that's when we plan out our week. And we didn't do this at first, but it's something we kind of added onto the process of adding meal planning onto that as well. So we have a big whiteboard up on the bottom of the stairs. And so we go in and we plan the meals for the week, and we do that pretty much every Sunday morning. And it kind of is impacted by what else is going on in the week, but that's been very successful for us.
Yeah, so a really simple thing you can do starting right now is just look for the next 7 days and see, okay, do I have a lot of meetings that particular day? Am I traveling? Am I going to be at home? Like, what does your schedule actually look like? Because that will often dictate what you'll be eating or where you'll be eating, right? So for example, if you're traveling, you're up in the air, you're probably going to be limited in terms of what you can eat or how you will eat or what you will eat. Versus being at home the whole day, right? That's when you have a lot more control in terms of, do I want to eat breakfast or skip it, or where will I go for lunch, and so on. And so once you kind of know what your schedule looks like over the next 7 days, it's easy to then make a plan to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to have breakfast at home on Monday, but on Tuesday I can't because I have to rush out really early to meet so and so for breakfast or something, right? So I'm going to have breakfast at this place instead. If you want to go even a step further and say, hey, if I know I'm going to have breakfast there, let me see what I should be eating there if it's somehow related to a fitness goal that you might have, right? So you can go to that degree and so on. And this brings up the next point, which is the whole idea of like, what is your goal when it comes to your personal health, but also your fitness goals and so on, because it affects how you plan your week as well, right? So we're not even talking about cooking or meal prepping in that sense, but just like planning around your schedule and also how it relates to your goals as well. So for example, if you know that you're trying to lose weight, going to eat somewhere where there's a lot of fried chicken is probably not a good idea, right? As much as I love fried chicken, and I've taken Brooks to a fried chicken place here in Austin, which we both enjoyed very much, it was not related to any health goals whatsoever. It was more of a social thing and introducing Brooks to what's so amazing about fried chicken here in Austin. But if you know that you have particular health goals and you're going to be eating out, it's helpful to be able to look ahead and say, oh, we're going to go to so and so place. Let me look at the menu. Like, let me know ahead of time what I want to eat or what I should be eating. So you kind of know, if it's going to hit your macro target and so on. Or if you want to reduce salt or have more protein, or you want to use gluten-free, right? These things affect where you're going to be eating as well, right? So if you already have plans, you can kind of look ahead. But if you're not sure where you're going to be eating yet, you can start planning and say, hey, if I want to be, for example, plant-based this upcoming week, it's probably going to affect where you're going to be eating or meeting someone for lunch, right? So these are all things you want to take into account.
Yeah, if you have a family, a lot of this is heavily impacted by your partners or your roommates or your kids' schedules, because a lot of our meal planning kind of revolves around kids' sports, especially now where I live, that school is back in session. So our meal planning has definitely taken some extra complexity. And so you have to take all that into account. And the more you can kind of look ahead for that, the better off you'll be. Now, Tan and I have gone through and we're going to be sharing some of our tips that works well for us, but we know that there's a lot, everybody does things a lot differently. So what we did is we asked different members of the Asian efficiency team and the dojo, our online productivity community, how they do meal planning, what some tips are for that. So for planning, Mary on the Asian efficiency team, what she does is she keeps a small notebook, which she takes out every single Saturday. So we do our meal planning Sunday, but she finds that Saturday works really well for her. And she uses that to plan out what to eat for the coming week. So that works for Mary. And Marmel, she said she plans actually 2 weeks out. That's what works well for her. And for where she lives, market day is on Friday. So what she does is she makes sure to plan around the market day, because she's found that you get the best deals and the best produce and stuff like that at the very beginning of market day. So she uses that as her anchor to kind of do the planning around for that. So yeah, those are some tips that work really well for other members of the Asian efficiency team.
So my schedule is actually relatively simple. Typically, I eat at home Monday through Thursday. So I'm mostly at home and eating the food that I want to eat. And usually from Thursday evening till Sunday evening is when I start eating out, usually at night. And sometimes in the daytime, I'll eat at home, or sometimes I'll be eating out with other people as well. So that's kind of flexible. So another way I kind of look at it is Monday through Thursday, I'll eat very healthy and clean as much as possible. So I like to eat low carb early in the week, so that if I want to have dessert or eat out and have a little bit more carbs and sugar later in the week, that's kind of like my way of balancing things a little bit. And so I always like to have my food kind of like prepared really early on in the week. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that in terms of meal prepping, right? Not planning, but prepping. I like to have my food delivered early in the week so I can eat healthy and clean Monday through Thursday. And then I'm kind of flexible when it comes to like Thursday through Sunday. And when it comes to my goals, that affects obviously how I'm going to be eating out as well, right? So for example, if I'm a very strict fitness goal, then I might be still eating out through the latter part of the week, but I might be a little bit more strict in terms of where I might go and where I can't go. And if I know that I'm going to be in a place where there's not a lot of great options for me, I might then eat at home and kind of plan around that. And then when I do go out, I might eat less when I'm there around other people. So these are some things that I do.
All right. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is to plan your meals and make it easy. So we're going to get into some of the tips that have worked well for us, other members of the team, other members of the community, touch on some things that Tan's already teased. And what this means is once you know what you need to plan for, so you've figured out what your goals are, you've figured out when is good for planning, you've kind of like looked ahead for the next week or 2 weeks or whatever works for you, then it's time to fill in those slots with a meal that ideally meets any of the goals that we talked about earlier that you might have. So we have a collection of tips and things you might want to try for both planning your meals and making it easy to actually accomplish those meals. And the first tip is if you cook, have some go-to dishes. So I know, Tam, this isn't so much for you, but for those who part of their meal planning involves cooking, what can be really, really helpful is have some specific go-to dishes that are easy for you to make and you can kind of like come back to time and time again. It's not to say you make them all the time, although I personally don't get bored of food, so that would be no problem for me. But for most people, you want to have some sort of variety. But if you have those like pillar dishes that's really easy for you to bang out, it can be really helpful to kind of like plan those out first, and then you can build around them for a bit more variety. And one tip for this is if you time your go-tos, as I call them, with times that you're otherwise busy. So you don't want to be trying to figure out a new dish when you have to leave for swimming lessons in an hour and a half or something like that. Like try, if possible, to time those go-to dishes with the times that you're busy, and then you can kind of like do the experimentation and the variety on the other times. So that's what worked out well for us. And one thing we applied to this, and this is 100% my wife's idea, I had nothing to do with this, but it's worked out really well for us, is I talked about how we use our whiteboard for our week planning, but also our meal planning. So what she did is she wrote her go-tos on sticky notes. And that way, when we plan out our meals, it's just like sticking those on the days and the meals that they apply to. And then first of all, it just saves writing the same things over and over again each week or every couple of weeks. But also it makes it really easy to move them around. If we decide that, meal planning doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stick to it 100%. And we're going to talk about that. But if you have it on sticky notes or something like that, it just makes it really easy to rearrange things as you need them. So that's the first tip. Now, I said that meal planning does not have to involve cooking. So Tan, maybe you want to take the second tip in this section.
Yeah, but before I go into that, Brooks, I'm going to ask you a question that everyone is thinking right now, which is, what is a typical go-to meal in the Duncan family?
Oh my gosh, you're going to put me on the spot here. Okay, so my wife has this thing we call green soup, which is like potatoes and kale and spinach like blended up. It's a lot better than it sounds. It's like garlicky and stuff like that. That's really good. She makes vegan cashew Alfredo, both for health reasons and because I don't do super well with dairy. She tries to reduce the dairy for the kids. So we make vegan Alfredo. Tacos sometimes. We do Taco Tuesday sometimes, and yeah, that sort of thing. Just a bunch of different go-tos that she sticks on the different days.
Nice. Yeah. Speaking of cooking and not cooking, as someone who hasn't really cooked much in the last few years, the second strategy here in terms of meal planning and what to cook here is my kind of go-to move, and that is to consider pre-cooked meals for delivery. So I mentioned very early on, like Freshly is like a service that I use, and as part of our top 30 resource, I mentioned HelloFresh as well. Like there's all these meal delivery services out there, especially here in the United States, where they already cook all the food for you, and then you just get it delivered to your home, and then all you have to do is just reheat it, right? So that's kind of like my go-to move. And it's really simple. It's already portioned. They're already have the labels on there that say how much fat, carbs, and protein is in there. So this is really good if one, you're really busy and you don't particularly enjoy cooking. Like all you have to do is really just like heat up the food, right? This is also really good if you have very specific fitness goals and you want to be very efficient about it, because everything is already done for you, because you don't have to worry about like how heavy does this chicken weigh, like how much protein does it actually have, right? It's already on the label. Now, the only downside of this that I can think of is one is it's typically much more expensive than if you were to cook on your own, right? So you have to pay a premium for that convenience. And then the other thing is it doesn't always taste as good as something you cook on your own. Like that's the only difference. And so if you're someone like me who, even though I enjoy fine dining and I will travel the world to visit like the top 100 restaurants all over the world and book trips around that, as much as I enjoy food in that way, when it comes to like my Monday through Thursday schedule, food to me is just fuel. Like I just needed to eat it, and it doesn't have to taste the greatest because I'm just using it to kind of go about my day and make sure that I'm, staying alive and that everything is functioning as it needs to. But other than that, like taste is not really that important to me. And so when it comes to this kind of operation, having like pre-cooked meals, like HelloFresh, Freshly, these are two like national chains that you can use wherever you live in the United States, and I think might be even in Canada. But I know many of you are, in Australia, in the UK, other parts of Europe and Asia, right? Some of you are in Africa, South America. Like every country will have its own unique service. Like every country over the last, I would say, 3 years has gone, used to the habit of like having a service in place where you can order food like that, right? Now, if you happen to be in a situation where they don't have that, like other options you can consider is what if you called your local restaurant that you like and maybe figure out a deal with them where they can start making food for you and then have it delivered or something like that, right? Or maybe you can find like a chef in your hometown and have that person cook for you. So my combination used to be, I used to use Freshly. I used them for about a year. And I will have links to that in the show notes as well. And they had a huge variety, and then every week I would just kind of like pick my meals and then would have it delivered to me. There's another local company here in Austin called Snap Kitchen that I really like. So if you're in Austin, that's a great one to use. But nowadays, a lot of grocery stores and grocery chains have their own meal delivery here as well, at least here in the United States. So that's something you might want to look into as well. Is just you go to your local grocery store and just buy prepackaged meals. And you buy them for a few days and you just heat them up when you're at home, right? So you might have to do a grocery run in that sense, but it's kind of like the same idea too, right? So I'm a big fan of this. This is how I've been eating for the last 7 years, and hence how I have only cooked one time in the last 7 years, right? Because I get my meals delivered. And the cool thing I have now is I have two chefs here in Austin. One that delivers their food Monday through Thursday, and it's like typically very healthy. Everything is like organic and grass fed and all that stuff. So it's a little bit more pricey. So on average, I pay about $16 per meal, just to kind of give you some context. And then I have Friday through Sunday. Every Friday, I found this Vietnamese lady here in Austin, and she loves to cook, and she delivers meals to me every Friday. And I started doing this because I sometimes miss like Vietnamese cuisine because I'm Vietnamese, and I miss sometimes the cookings of my mom. And so I found a Vietnamese lady here who will cook for me every Friday, and she'll deliver it to my place. So then, and it's always different, but she knows kind of like my taste now. So what's cool about this is every Monday I get a delivery and I have no idea what I'm eating. So it's kind of like a Christmas surprise. And the same thing on Friday, I have no idea what I'm eating. So it's another Christmas surprise in terms of what I'm eating, but it's always stuff that I like. So I don't honestly ever worry about food or even think about it. It's literally my job is just to eat the food. That's it. Like the only thing I'm worrying about at this point is like, am I actually going to finish my meals, or am I have to throw some stuff away because I didn't have time for it or whatever. That's like my main concern. So I know that's a very privileged place to be. But if you're someone who is in that kind of similar situation where you're extremely busy and you're willing to pay a premium, this is a very efficient way of eating and going about your day.
If you have special food that you like, I think that is more possible than you might think, because I'd completely forgotten about this until you just told that story. Is I have friends who, when they had kids, and they were working as well, busy and working, what they did is they're Cantonese, and what they did is they found some local grandma or something like that who would make them Cantonese food. Same thing, bring it over, freeze it, sometimes freeze it, sometimes bring it over fresh, and it was the same thing. It was so that they could have the food that they wanted, but they didn't. They just didn't have the time or energy or attention to cook it themselves. So I think these things, especially if you live in a slightly larger place, I think these things can be more possible than we all think. Because I had never even heard of that till my friends told me that. And then you just told me the similar story. All right, so the next tip, and this is something we record these episodes live in front of the dojo, our productivity community, and also TPS Plus, which is our premium ad-free week ahead version of the productivity show, which you can learn more about at theproductivityshow.com/plus. And so I asked, as we're recording, I asked in the chat if anybody has any tips. And there's been a lot of tips revolving around this concept, which is batching and pre-prep can be your friend. And so a little bit of work up front can save so much time and energy later. And there's two kind of like high level ways you can go about this. Number one is to pre-prep ingredients to make later. And so this is what Ken in the live stream says. He does a partial meal prep twice a week. So it makes the meal so much quicker to make during the day, because you're like halfway there almost, if not more. And then another tip is to just like make a big quantity that you can reheat later. So that can be a great tip too. And Phil mentioned he does that sort of thing. So there's lots of different ways you can go about this. I asked some of the members of the AE team what they do. So Mary says what she does is when the groceries and stuff arrive, she does grocery delivery too, because the city she lives in, actually, they started doing it for COVID reasons, but it's just really convenient now. So what she does is she sorts all the ingredients right when they come. She sorts all the ingredients for each meal, and then like organizes them, puts them in containers, and cling wraps them, so that when it's time to make, she just busts it out of the fridge, and she doesn't need to chop or do heavy prepping stuff. She just dumps them in the pot and pan. So if you're able to do it right when the groceries come in the house, it makes it so much easier later. And then Marmel says that when she does her meal plan, what she does is she plans her meals out along with the type of food that and ingredients that it is. So she uses the produce that kind of goes bad more quickly in the first few days of the week. And then she's got her freezer organized for each recipe. And Phil says he does something like that too. They don't buy meat from the supermarket. They buy it in bulk from a source that they choose. And then they just buy enough meat to cover like 10 weeks. So I'm going to guess they have he even says they have a pretty large freezer. That's something I do not have. But that is another strategy as well. There's lots of ways you can save time and energy later by pre-prepping and batch cooking. Another tip that dojo member Christina shared is to mix and match the basics. So what that means is maybe you want to take advantage of these like prepping and pre-organizing and even kind of like batching, but you don't want to get bored of the same thing all the time. What she says is if you get bored eating the exact same thing every day like I do, this is her, make the following and get creative about how you combine them. So instead of pre-creating dishes, pre-create kind of inputs. So what she'll do is she'll make a big batch of grains like rice or whatever it is, a decent amount of like 6 to 8 meals worth of meat or other protein, a big pan of roasted veggies, some fresh veggies, and maybe like a big sauce that you can use for different things. And then what she does is then she just, as she goes through the week, she just combines those in different ways so that she gets the benefit of batching, but she can shake it up every single day instead of eating the same thing every day. And I thought that was a really cool idea.
I think what's interesting though, Brooks, is I know some people will bring this up too, and they'll say, well, this all kind of sounds boring and, not that great. Like food is supposed to make me feel good, makes me like something like I should really enjoy, right? So doesn't meal planning take out all the spontaneity out of it? Like, what if you don't feel like the thing you planned for? Well, like, what do you do then?
Well, like we said, meal planning doesn't mean you have to plan every single meal. And the example that you gave earlier was I thought a really good one, which is, you plan out your meals Monday to Thursday, you have that all set, but then you leave Friday and the weekends open for like fun dinner with friends and stuff like that. So you get most of the benefits of meal planning when it has the highest leverage for you during the week, but you still have that spontaneity and enjoyment on the weekend. And that's the thing. Like, this meal planning serves as a guide, not a straitjacket. It makes it so that when you come home Wednesday evening and you're tired from work and you have only a little bit of time before kids' gymnastics or something like that, you don't have to figure out what to eat. It's already figured out. If you need to change it up, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, that's fine. But it kind of like gives you a guide and just saves you so much time and energy, but it doesn't have to like suck all the soul and enjoyment out of food. You can mix and match this stuff too.
Something I did pre-COVID was I had a assistant that would come in here in person, and she would kind of like help out with stuff around the place and stuff like that. But one of the tasks that I had her do as well was to cut up veggies and fruits and have them in Ziploc bags in certain portion sizes as well. And so what this allowed me to do was anytime I wanted to make a smoothie, I knew exactly that I just need to grab one Ziploc bag that was pre-made with all the veggies and fruits, and then just dump it in my blender, and then I was good to go. So that made it really simple for me to make a lot of smoothies without me trying to like cut my own, bananas and like figure out how much blueberries I need and how much, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She already did all the kind of like heavy lifting in that sense, right? So you can kind of take the same idea and apply it to whatever you want to do, right? So it's kind of like the whole idea of like, what can you do to kind of start batch prepping or pre-prepping a little bit ahead of time to make it really easy for your future self to kind of get going? Because like you're saying, many of us get to a stage where, we come home from work, we're really tired and we just don't know what to eat. Like, if we have any sort of friction, it makes it very difficult to then get started. And the easiest thing to do then is just open up Uber Eats or something like that and just order something that could be, pretty tasty, but maybe doesn't align with your fitness goals or health goals or whatever you want to accomplish with your eating goals, right? And so we want to make sure we eliminate that friction as much as possible. So that's kind of like something I want people to consider as well. So that kind of wraps up tip number 2 here in terms of making or planning your meals and making it easy. So let's move on to tip number 3 here, and that is to be flexible and involve others. So this is especially true if you're someone who lives in a home with other people, you have family members, you have kids potentially even, right? I know in your situation, Brooks, like this is not a one solo act, right? Like everyone is involved in this process. So I'm kind of curious to hear how you and your family kind of do this in terms of how are you flexible and how are you involving kids? Are they like the labor people? Are they cooking all the food and you and your wife just do, the eating part, or what's the division of labor there?
I'm going to say that is a fluid situation. It's a work in progress, maybe is a better way to put it. So basically, the ideal, and it doesn't happen every week, but when we can pull it off, when we try to have our weekly meeting on Sunday, ideally everybody will give input. With my kids being older, a lot of times they're out of the house more. So a lot of times what happens is, like we say, we'll have our go-tos. So my wife will generally take those sticky notes and like put them where align with the schedule that we have, kind of like put them where on the weekly calendar that we think it's going to go. And that's actually one benefit of having them on sticky notes, because while often my kids aren't as involved as they used to be with the planning, what can happen is if it's coming up to a day and say my son wants salmon burgers instead of, which is another one of our go-to salmon burgers instead of the vegan cashew Alfredo. They can move the sticky notes around. As far as the division of labor, what's supposed to happen is my oldest son is supposed to help my wife cook, and then my youngest son and I are the cleanup crew. Like I said, that whole thing is a work in progress, but theoretically, that's what's supposed to happen. Now, as far as what the rest of the AE team does, so Mary says what she does is she asks her kids what they want to eat. And normally this saves her from decision fatigue because they get to pick and decide. So she has quite a few kids, and it sounds like they're more opinionated than mine are as far as what to eat. And so what she does is kind of something similar, where she has sticky notes that she posts on the fridge weekly so that the kids can see what is going to be happening on the particular day. And then it kind of like sets expectations to the family. And she says a side benefit of that is it becomes reading practice for the young ones because they can read it on the fridge. So I thought that was a cool tip. And one tip that Mary gives is to be flexible. No one can plan for everything. That's totally fine. I like the way she says it. She says a meal plan is there to make life easier, not to bind you to some sort of eating contract, which I thought is a great way to put it. So she says when she's just feeling tired or whatever, she doesn't necessarily cook. They have budget set aside for takeout and food deliveries when that happens. But like she said, the meal plan definitely makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, we have a lot of resources when it comes to this topic as well. So a lot of things we already brought up, but we also have a really helpful article on the blog called A Systems Approach to Healthy Eating. So we'll link to it in the show notes as well. And it's kind of like a holistic approach to how do you design your calendar, your planning around like eating healthy. So it kind of talks about the ideas that we talked about today and goes into even more detail in terms of like screenshots and actual things to consider to the nth degree. So we'll link to that blog post in the show notes. And then also back in the day in TPS 226. So if you go to theproductivityshow.com/226, we had Aaron Chase on the podcast, who's known for the $5 dinners with recipes and meal plans that you can accomplish with just $5. And she was talking a lot about her week and her day and how she structures things and how she uses meals and planning around that as well. So be sure to check out those two resources because they're going to be extremely helpful for you if you want to start diving deeper in today's topic.
Yep. And the key, like we said, is to be flexible. A meal plan is a guide, not a straitjacket. Sometimes things are going to come up. Something Phil mentioned in the live stream and Marmel also mentioned is leftovers. And that's something we do a lot. Our leftovers from dinner become the kids' lunches the next day, especially now that they're back at school. We're lucky in the sense that we have both sets of grandparents here in town. So a lot of times we'll go over there for dinner and end up using those leftovers for maybe dinner or lunches the next day. And sometimes what we'll do is if we are doing takeout, which happens sometimes, like Mary said, sometimes you're just not feeling it and you end up doing takeout after. But we'll end up doing is maybe ordering some more that we can then use for leftovers the next day as well. So if we do end up doing takeout, we try to turn that into some sort of meal planning for the next day as well. And that's worked out pretty well for us.
Awesome. So that is tip number 3 here today for you, right? So be flexible and involve others. Okay, so those are the 3 tips we have for you here today when it comes to meal planning. So we always like to end our episodes with one simple action step that you can take so we can make this podcast episode actionable for you. So if you made it this far, what I recommend you do next is just look ahead for the next week and then plan your meals for a minimum of just one day to start off with, okay? If you're brand new to meal planning, just start off by planning for one meal or one day ahead of time. And if you're someone who is already planning a little bit when it comes to meal planning, try to aim for a whole week. Can you accomplish this? Can you get a whole week's worth of planning done for your meals? I think you can. So go give that a try. And again, I would love for you to check us out next week as well. We have an episode coming out on our favorite productivity apps, and hence it's going to involve new apps that we haven't talked about before. So I'm really excited to share that with you here today or next week. And if you want to have links to everything that we mentioned in the show notes. Go to theproductivityshow.com/372. So thanks again for joining us here today. We'll see you next Productive Monday.